There was a time when the township was not simply a place where black people lived. It was a marketplace, a factory without a factory building, a distribution network, an employment center, and perhaps most importantly, it was a place where black people learned one of the most important principles of economics. If you cannot find an opportunity, you created one. During some of the darkest years of apartheid, when opportunities for black South Africans were deliberately restricted, township residents developed businesses that kept families alive. They called it survival. But if you look at it through the language of economics today, we would call it something else. Perhaps township entrepreneurship, hair salons, tuck shops, taverns, taxi businesses, small-scale bakeries, street vendors, home-based food businesses, shebeenz, and informal hospitality, small-scale manufacturing, an entire ecosystem of suppliers, mechanics, builders, wholesalers, transport operators, and service providers grew around them. Some people later referred to these pillars as the STT economy: salons, tuck shop, taverns, taxi industries. 4 industries, 0 government subsidy, built by black hands in the middle of apartheid, when the state was actively restricting black economic opportunities. And still, it boomed. It was not perfect, was largely informal, but it was ours. And it worked. This is the business desk. Let's talk about what we built, what was taken, and who's cashing in on the difference. Let's be honest about what this STT actually was. It wasn't informal trading as a hobby. It was infrastructure. It was survival economics that outperformed a hostile state. The hair salon on the corner, the tuck shop that gave you bread on credit until payday, the tavern that funded stockfels and buried our dead with dignity, the taxi that got a domestic worker to Sandton at 5 a.m. in the morning, when no bus route was built to save her. Nobody designed this system of us. We designed it our own selves. Now, here's where I need you to set up, because at some stage, numbers do matter. Industry estimates put South Africa's township economy at somewhere between 750 to 950 billion a year in annual economic activities. That's not a typo. That's according to retail and trade intelligence analysts tracking the sector through 2025 and into the 2026 year. Spaza shops alone, just the tuck shops, have been valued at close to 178 billion, feeding an estimated 150,000 outlets nationally and employing something like 2.6 million people. Hair salons make up roughly 1 in 6 township businesses on their own. The minibus taxi industry, the fourth leg of the STTT, turns over somewhere in the region of 50 to 90 billion a year in revenue and carries the majority of working South Africans to their jobs every single day. 68% of work journeys in this country happen in a taxi. Not a train, not a bus, not a GO train. Let that sink in. This is not a struggling informal sector that needs to be rescued. This is close to a R1 trillion economy that has run itself and bailed out for 3 full decades and more. So, explain something to me. If this economy is worth close to R1 trillion and it has run itself without a single government cent for 30 years into the democratic dispensation and many, many years during those dark days, those dark years of the gruesome apartheid government. Why in the last couple of years has the state suddenly decided that the tuck shop is a crisis that needs formalization? Not investment, not infrastructure, not credit facilities for the grandmother who has run that shop since before 1994. Registration drives, compliance deadlines, rates, and in the same breath, foreign nationals were permitted to move into that same tuck shop and salon space at a high scale in a sector the law never intended to open to them that way. Our own legislation is clear. A foreign national qualifies for a business or work permit on the basis of a critical or scarce skill or documented capital investment meeting a defined threshold, not for taking over a spaza counter selling bread and airtime, even electricity for prepaid users. I want to be precise here because precision matters more than heat. This isn't a call to hate a fellow African who has crossed a border looking for a better life, the same way our own parents once crossed borders during exile. The question I'm putting to the government is a legal and administrative one. Who is verifying that permit conditions are actually being met? Industry by industry, shop by shop. If there are networks using retail storefronts as a cover for undeclared trade, that is a matter for the Hawks, SARS, and Home Affairs to investigate and prove, not for talk radio to convict. But the state owes the township trader whose family built the sector from absolutely nothing. A straight answer on enforcement. Silence on that question is its own kind of insult. The black child robbed of her entrepreneurial intelligence. The story that we don't talk about enough. Our parents were innovators of note. Long before the language of product development, branding, market penetration, and consumer packaged goods became fashionable, township households were producing and selling their own products. Our elders brewed umqombothi in the backyard and got arrested for it under apartheid liquor laws. While the same brew, once trademarked, bottled, and put behind supermarket counter, became a craft heritage product. Mageu or Amaheu, ginger beer, hop beer, umhluzi, home science. My grandmother did with a wooden spoon. Someone also patented with a lawyer. Pap and Shishana on a half-drum braai fed a township for generations for free. Dress it up as a boerewors braai franchise, and suddenly it's a listed brand on a mall food court. I'm not saying nobody else may sell umqombothi or braai meat. I'm saying acknowledge and credit its origin. That's not nostalgia. In a modern economy, that's called intellectual property. And we were never in the room when the paperwork got filed. Who owns economic innovation? Is innovation only innovation once it has been formalized, branded, and commercialized? Or can innovation also emerge from a township kitchen, a backyard, a shopping, a salon, or a street corner? That is a conversation South Africa still needs. Now we arrive at one of the most politically sensitive parts of our conversation. Foreign nationals operating businesses within the South African townships. Let us be precise. This is not an argument against foreign nationals as human beings. South Africa has always been part of a regional economy. That's a fact. Migration is not new. Competition is also not new. And foreign entrepreneurs have every right to operate within South Africa's laws where they meet the applicable legal and regulatory requirements. But there is a legitimate economic question that must be asked. How does government balance immigration, entrepreneurship, employment, competition, and the economic participation of its own citizens? That question cannot simply be dismissed as xenophobia. It requires evidence, it requires law, it requires enforcement, and it requires economic policy. Where businesses are operating illegally, government must enforce the law, regardless of the nationality of the owner. Where businesses are operating legally, they should be treated according to the law. And where immigration or business permit requirements apply, those requirements must be administered consistently. The real failure occurs when government allows an uncontrolled or poorly regulated environment to develop in which legitimate South African entrepreneurs feel that they are competing on an uneven playing field. That is not a good economic policy. We need to be careful here. The tuck shop is not the enemy. The foreign entrepreneur is not automatically the enemy. The problem is an economic system that allows productive citizens to remain economically excluded, while informal markets become increasingly disconnected from local ownership and wealth creation. That's the issue. If 10 township shops generate millions of rand in turnover, the question should not simply be who owns the value chain. The bigger question is, where does the money go? Who owns the premises? Who supplies the products? Who owns the distribution network? Who owns the wholesalers? Who owns the logistics? Who owns the brands? Who controls the intellectual property? And how much of that economic value remains inside the township? That is the conversation we should be having. Let's take bread. Bread is one of the simplest products in the South African economy. Yet behind that loaf is an enormous economic chain. Agriculture, wheat, milling, manufacturing, packaging, logistics, wholesale, retail, and finally, the consumer. Now ask yourself, where is the Black township entrepreneur positioned in that value chain? Too often, at the very tail end, as the consumer, perhaps as the informal retailer, but rarely as the owner of the industrial machinery that produces the value. And that is the fundamental problem with much of our economic development. We keep teaching people how to sell. We don't teach enough people how to own the value chain. But then something changed. The township economy began to lose ground. Formal retail expanded. Shopping malls arrived. Large chains entered communities. Regulatory requirements increased. Financing remained difficult. Land and property ownership remained a challenge. And many township businesses struggled to transition from survivalist enterprises into sustainable, scalable businesses. This is where government must also look into the mirror. Because today, we hear a lot about township industrialization. We hear about township economic development. We hear about localization. We hear about small businesses support. But let us ask a simple question. What exactly are we trying to industrialize? The township economy did not suddenly appear because government invented it. It was already there. The black entrepreneur was already there. The taxi owner was already there. The salon owner was already there. The tuck shop owner was already there. The baker was there already. The food producer as well was already there. The question is not whether the township economy existed. The question is, why did we fail to transform it into a powerful formal economy? Then there is the unscripted taxi industry. For decades, Black South Africans built one of the largest privately operated public transport networks in the country. It moved millions of people. It created thousands of businesses. And it did so without the state having to build every taxi route itself. Then came the taxi recapitalization program, announced in 1999. Still limping along today, has paid out roughly 5.6 billion over 17 years just to scrap old taxis. Independent researchers, including peer-reviewed studies published as recently as this year, call it a program that has failed to meet its own targets, failed to end taxi violence, and left operators short by up to 200,000 rand each when forced into new vehicles they couldn't actually afford. This raised another question. What happened to the broader economic transformation of the taxi industry? Replacing a vehicle is not the same thing as transforming an industry. Where is the black-owned manufacturing? Where is the component manufacturing? Where is the finance? Where are the insurance businesses? Where are the technology? Where are the technology platforms? Where are the maintenance franchise? Where are the logistics companies? Where is the industrial value? The industrial value chain around the taxi industry. The taxi owner should not only be a purchaser of a vehicle manufactured somewhere else. The taxi economy should be capable of producing entrepreneurs throughout the value chain. Meanwhile, the GO train, built on an original 7 billion rand budget that ballooned past 30 billion rand, has needed a running subsidy that hit roughly 1.6 billion per annum by 2017-2018, propping up a service that mainly moves the professional class between Sandton, Pretoria, and the airport. Cape Town's My City bus system has been running on a national treasury grant of close to 915 million per annum. Add in South African Airways bailouts and the collapse of SA Express, and you start to see a pattern. When the state chooses to fund transport, it funds the transport that carries executives, not the transport that carries the black child to a night shift in a township taxi. So, don't tell us the township economy has failed. Tell us where the 30 years of transport budget actually went, and then explain honestly why the industry that moved 68% of this country's workforce was the one left to recapitalize itself. I reject the idea that the township economy failed simply because it remained informal. It survived, it adapted, it created employment, it fed families, it transported workers, it provided services, It produced products and services. It circulated the rand multiple times within the communities. And it did all of this under extraordinary, difficult conditions. If anything, the bigger failure is that we did not build the institutions required to take the entrepreneurial energy to the next level. We did not sufficiently convert survivalist entrepreneurship into industrial ownership. We did not sufficiently develop township-based manufacturing. We did not sufficiently integrate them into formal supply chains. And we did not sufficiently protect the economic value created by township entrepreneurs from simply flowing out of the community. So what should happen? First, township businesses must become bankable. A business cannot grow if it cannot access affordable finance. 2, township entrepreneurs must move up the value chain. Don't only sell bread, produce the bread. Don't only sell hair products, manufacture them. Don't only operate a taxi, own the transport infrastructure. Don't only run a tuck shop, build the distribution network. Third, government procurement must create genuine market access. A business cannot survive on training certificates. It needs customers. 4, township industrial parks must become productive spaces, not simply buildings with signs outside. They need electricity, water, internet, logistics, warehousing, equipment, finance, markets, management. You can name them. Both the intellectual property of African innovation must be protected and commercialized. If our communities are producing products with commercial potential, we must learn how to package, brand, protect, and scale them. And finally, economic transformation must mean ownership, not merely participation, but ownership. STTT didn't fail. It was never funded, never protected. And now it's being quietly handed over while government calls it formalization. The township economy was never empty. It was never waiting for somebody to come and save it. It was already alive. Our parents built it. Our grandparents sustained it. They created business in an environment designed to restrict their economic freedom. They made a plan. They survived. And they created opportunity for the next generation. The tragedy is that 30 years into democracy, we still have millions of Black South Africans asking the same basic economic question. Where is my opportunity? Perhaps the answer is not another government program. Perhaps the answer is to look again at what our parents already built and then ask, how do we turn survival into ownership? How do we turn a tuck shop into a distribution company? A salon into a national brand? A taxi into a transport corporation? A backyard bakery into a manufacturing business? A traditional drink into a commercial African brand? And a township into an economic production center? Because the objective should never be to make the township economy merely survive. The objective must be to make it own. Own the businesses. Own the buildings. Own the factories. Own the intellectual property. Own the supply chains. Own the technology. Own the distribution. And ultimately, own the economic future. This is UBUNTU-CAST. I am Gladwin White, and this is the business desk.